Good morning. I would like to address how my office will be handling death penalty cases going forward. In just over a year, Florida's death penalty statute has twice been ruled unconstitutional. A new statute was enacted this past Tuesday morning. That is Florida's second death penalty statute in less than 2 years. I have thoroughly reviewed the newly passed statute and relevant legal decisions relating to Florida's death penalty. As a state attorney, I took an oath to support, protect, and defend the Constitution, and the American Bar Association Rules of Professional Conduct outline my duties as a prosecutor. My duty is to seek justice, which is fairness, objectivity, and decency. I am to seek reform and improve the administration of criminal justice. I am prohibited from making the severity of sentences the index of my effectiveness. Deciding when and if to seek death penalty is one of the most important decisions I will have to make in my capacity as state attorney. It is a serious decision with grave consequences for victims' families, for this community, and for defendants and their families. I have given this issue extensive and painstaking thought and consideration. What has become abundantly clear through this process is that while I currently do have discretion to pursue death sentences, I have determined that doing so is not in the best interest of this community or the best interest of justice. After careful review and consideration of the new statute, under my administration, I will not be seeking death penalty in cases handled in my office. Let me be very clear, however. I will continue to hold people who do harm to this community accountable for their actions. I will do so in a way that is sensible, fair, and just. Florida's death penalty has been the cause of considerable legal chaos, uncertainty, and turmoil. An analysis of death penalty must be pragmatic. It must be realistic and not simply theoretical, impulsive, or emotional. I had to answer difficult questions as I arrived at this decision. Is it practical? Does it make sense? And most importantly, is it evidence-based? After review and study of death penalty, I have found the following facts that undergird my decision not to seek death penalty. Number one, death penalty has no public safety benefit. There is no evidence that death sentences actually protect the public. A comprehensive review of research in the area of death penalty over 34 years was conducted by a committee of the American National Academy of Sciences National Review Council. The committee concluded, and I quote, "The research to date on the effect of capital punishment on homicide is not informative about whether capital punishment decreases, increases, or has no effect on homicide rates." Number two, the death penalty does not increase safety for law enforcement officers, which was a priority for me before I made this decision. Despite my efforts, I've been unable to find any credible evidence that suggests death penalty increases safety for law enforcement officers. I did find, however, a national death penalty study which found the presence or absence of death penalty has no bearings on law enforcement deaths by homicide. That same study found states that have ended death penalty tended to have fewer law enforcement deaths by homicide after their states ended the death penalty. According to that study, the deadliest states for law enforcement officers are all states that have actively used death penalty, including Florida. Number three, the death penalty generally is not a deterrent. Deterrents must not only consider severity, but also certainty and frequency. Neither describe death penalty in this state. Death penalty is used too rarely to say that it is a true deterrent. Punishment is most effective when it happens consistently and swiftly. Neither describe death penalty in this state. The average death row inmate waits 12 years between sentencing and execution, some up to more than 30 years. The FBI Uniform Crime Report shows that while the South, including Florida, accounts for around 80% of executions, we also have the highest murder rate. This does not describe deterrence. Number four, false promises of death penalty gives families no closure. Some victims will support and some will surely oppose my decision. But I have learned that death penalty traps many victims' families in decades-long cycle of uncertainty, court hearings, appeals, and waiting. They are left waiting for an execution. Some are waiting for an execution that may never occur. I cannot, in good faith, look a victim's family in the face and promise that a death sentence handed down in our courts will ever result in execution. And finally, number 5, the death penalty costs millions of dollars that far outweigh the cost of life in prison sentences. According to the Florida Department of Corrections, it costs $53.49 a day, or $19,000 and $577 per year to house an inmate in Florida prisons. The American Bar Association has reported that in Florida, a death sentence case costs approximately $2.5 million more than a life sentence. It has been noted that Florida spends upward of $51 million per year to impose and implement death penalty. By not deciding to pursue death in a handful of cases, we can spend more time pursuing justice in many more cases. I do understand that this is a controversial issue, but what is not controversial is the evidence that led me to my decision. If I require the attorneys in my office to manage cases, their individual cases, based upon evidence, I must follow the same evidence-based approach when I implement policies. My commitment to this community is to pursue justice in a way that ensures accountability, fairness, and integrity. By choosing to seek life sentences over death, we can assure that violent offenders will never be released. They will never continue to drain resources from this state with decades of appeals. And we can offer families of the victims more closure and more certainty. I am steadfast that the implementation of this policy is consistent with my duty as the elected state attorney for this circuit, and it is in the best interest of this community and in the best interest of justice.
Legal experts that you've spoken to say this blanket position goes against state law. So under what legal authority do you have to make this decision as state attorney?
The Florida law gives me the discretion under the statute of pursuing death penalty that I have the discretion of whether or not to seek it.
You said this will allow you to pursue other cases, yet just last night your office dropped 2 cases that were connected to the Marquis Lloyd case for Outweigh and demise slaughter. Can you say how this allows you to pursue other cases if these are not going to be prosecuted?
We can have more staff. We can have more cases staffed by more people. It allows us more resources to be able to respond to it versus using the resources to attempt to kill individuals.
What about those 2 cases that were just dropped, though?
It allows us the opportunity to have individual attorneys to seek out the facts of those cases and make a determination versus waiting, setting court dates and utilizing court resources and wasting time.
This decision is something the FOP and Chief Mina have spoken out against. They are upset by this decision. How do you plan to maintain a good working relationship with law enforcement after this announcement?
Well, I understand that law enforcement may be upset, and I did speak to Chief Mina. I will discuss with him further details of the evidence that I have absolutely considered law enforcement. I appreciate what they do. We need law enforcement. Their job is not a safe one, which is why my priority is to make certain that the sentences we are seeking are actually not because we hope, not because we're emotional, but they actually are evidence-based, that they are supporting more safety for law enforcement officers, sir.
The attorney said that 3 weeks ago that you were asking your staff to undergo a review of the death penalty. Is this the result of that review, and how much of this is their recommendation, how much of this is your decision based on your belief system?
What I did is I absolutely started with the point of, are we going to pursue death penalty? Is there a way that we can be consistent in this office? Do we agree with this policy as being consistent, as being evidence-based? And I arrived at the decision that it is not proper for this office to seek justice and actually enforce this particular one. So we looked at the policies and moved forward, and I made a decision.
It sounds like this is something that goes deep within you. I'm wondering whether this should have been a bigger issue during the campaign last year. Did people ask you about your position on death penalty? Were you this what's coming?
At the time that I was campaigning, death penalty was in that flux that has created, that brought us to this position. While I may be have my personal feelings, and most people have their personal feelings about death penalty, when I'm in the position of state attorney, I have to eliminate my personal feelings and pursue whether or not the evidence supports my decision, and I believe that it does.
When you applied to the position for the major cases section back in fall of 2015, Jeff Ashton says you were very specifically asked your position on the death penalty. At that point in time, you told him you had no problem pursuing the death penalty, and in fact, he describes the first capital case you got and your excitement to handle that case. So what has changed between then and now, and does this $1.4 million contribution have anything to do with your stance?
I can tell you what has changed is I'm no longer an assistant state attorney. I'm this state attorney, and it requires another level of accountability. I am required to consider policy, not an individual case. It is my responsibility to make a determination of whether or not this is justice for this community, not in individual cases. There may be cases, even active ones, that I think death penalty may be appropriate because of the egregiousness of the offense. I have to also consider the other things that I just listed previously in my statement.
Does this mean you're
You
going
were
to?
quoted last month as saying that you wanted to see how this all played out with the death penalty law. It sounds, from what you're saying today, that you really had already made your decision.
It may sound like that. I can assure you I have not made my decision, because when I took office on January 3rd, within 2 days, there was another ruling from the Supreme Court regarding death penalty, followed by other orders issued from the death penalty. This has been an inconsistent system since I took office, and now the governor has signed a statute that is in place, but it has gone on, and each time something has come up, I have had to consider everything before I move forward. I have now considered everything since the statute has been enacted. It would be premature for me to take a position before a statute has been enacted.
Is there anything that could make you change your mind?
If there was a possibility that we could speed up the process, not drag victims through this process where it's grueling, if we could eliminate the cost that the citizens have to go through, if we could do those things, I would absolutely feel that it would be properly administered. And if I believed or I had any credible evidence that it caused more harm on this community or the wonderful law enforcement officers who serve us, I would absolutely change my mind.
Have you talked to pending death penalty cases that have?
Sergeant Clayton's family about your decision to not seek the death penalty in this case?
I did. I reached out to her husband yesterday. Unfortunately, I did not have an opportunity to speak to every victim's family who this decision has impacted because of the circumstances beyond my control. Before I had made the announcement, it was my intent, out of respect for the victims, to speak to every single family.
What does this mean for pending death penalty
from
cases
Master
now?
Sergeant Clayton's family in regards to not seeking the death penalty in this case, the family members that you were able to speak to?
They understood where I was coming from. I outlined the things that I outlined here. Someone may disagree with it, but they understand I did not arrive at this arbitrarily or emotionally.
What does this mean for the pending death penalty cases now in your jurisdiction?
I'm sorry. I'll be right with you. Yes?
What does this mean for cases on direct appeal as well as cases that may be getting resentenced here?
When it comes to the mandates, you're talking about the resentencing cases, I haven't received the mandate from the Supreme Court. I will deal with those on a case-by-case basis because I have to follow the rules of the Supreme Court. While I have a responsibility to enforce the law justly, I have a responsibility to follow orders from the Supreme Court, which I will never hesitate to do.
Is there
There
any
are
other
still pending
jurisdiction?
death penalty cases in the jurisdiction, about 5 or 6 that were filed under the previous administration. Do you plan to file a notice to withdraw the intent to seek the death penalty in those cases that have not yet gone to trial?
I do. I've spoken to the attorneys assigned to those cases, the victim advocates, and the families.
Is there any other jurisdiction in the state of Florida where jurors would not have the option to decide the fate of someone like Lloyd in this case?
I'm not sure.
Obviously, this case is affecting Marquis Lloyd's case as well. I want to ask you, do you plan to file charges against the officers from OPD who had used force against Marquis Lloyd in that case?
That's still under investigation.
Aren't you taking something off the table when you're trying, you, at least trying to negotiate with the suspect for information, if you take away the possibility they may be facing death penalty?
When it comes to negotiation, I think we as prosecutors have a responsibility to negotiate. One thing that I think is inhumane is to negotiate life.
George Soros contributed more than $1 million to your campaign. What is his stance on the death penalty? Would you say that it influenced your decision in any way?
I would say that you have to speak directly to Mr. Soros, which I have not, about his position. What I can tell you is that I owe the citizens of this community the things that I told them on the campaign, which what my promises: criminal justice reform, integrity, humanity, all of the things, and most importantly, that all my decisions as I made policy would be evidence-based, which this is.
Do you see any exception to?
I see concern. I see opportunities where, if death penalty was an option for me as a state attorney, if all of the things that you talked about, that you asked me earlier, if anything could change it, I see cases that they may absolutely deserve death penalty. But a case that may deserve it because we feel that way must be supported by a statute that can be justly administered and enforced. That's the issue.
Legal experts say Marquis Lloyd's case, though, is more than just a feeling. Our legal experts say the aggravating factors in Marquis
And that's their interpretation.
What do you say to those who say this is directly tied to your $1.4 million campaign contribution?
I tell them the same thing that I just told the other reporter, and that is that my obligation is to the citizens of this community and the promises that I made regarding my ability to be humane, to engage in criminal justice reform, to be accountable for my decisions, to be ethically sound, and follow the ABA rules of my responsibilities.
If the Florida legislature does fix the death penalty sentencing system, would that change your mind?
If the death penalty system was one that, again, did not drag out for years and years, decades and decades, if the death penalty was one that didn't take victims' families through this whole entire process, if the death penalty had all of the concerns, we would revisit this issue.
Can you clarify, you just said a second ago that the main issue, I think you said the main issue is the death penalty statute. Then you outlined 5 reasons why you personally don't like it. Which is the overriding concern for you, the statute or the 5 things you don't like?
Allow me to correct you. I did not identify any personal reasons that I don't like it. I identified the basis, the logical basis, my research, my study, and my reflection dealing with deterrence, which is not an opinion, dealing with victims' families, which is not an opinion, dealing with public safety, which is not an opinion, dealing with with law enforcement officers, which is not an opinion. When you ask me the question, which one is it? It is my ability to enforce the statute, which is my requirement under the law to do it in a just way. There is no justice when victims are being misled about an end that I doubt will occur.
This is nothing you researched prior to your run for office, because again, voters probably should have known that this may be your decision.
Again, death penalty was not even a legitimate sentence at that time. Death penalty cannot be pursued while I was running for
But you knew
office.
It could be, so you hadn't given it any thought or research prior to running for office?
Absolutely, I gave it thought. I mean, and as an assistant state attorney, that's one of the issues, is that we continue to think that we've arrived at a level of professionalism or a level of success when we're able to pursue a death case. That is not humane, and that is not consistent with how we should pursue justice. So because I have that concern, I absolutely make certain that if we're going to pursue this, it needs to be something that is necessary, something that is consistent, something that is a deterrent, something that increases public safety.
Should voters have known that, though? That you had that concern prior to?
I mean, all voters know now.
Just to be very clear, will your office no longer be pursuing death cases that you've since been inherited from your predecessor?
That is correct.
Okay, 2 more questions.
Not 2 hours ago, the Florida House of Representatives Committee approved the development of created an avenue for the impeachment of state attorneys. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on whether there's political basis for that bill, or whether or not anybody has suggested that you are the
That has not been suggested to me. What I can tell you, as I said in my original statement, I believe that I am following the Constitution as well as the ABA rules that outline my responsibilities as a prosecutor, which is what undergird my decision as well as the other things that I discussed.